Greetings. I'm Fred Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. A warm welcome to those of you joining us in our Washington headquarters and virtually from around the world. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Atlantic Council Front Page, our premier platform for global leaders, and for this conversation with John Jovanovic, President and Chairman of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. So John, I'm very sorry I couldn't be with you in person. I'm traveling. You understand that affliction. But a very warm welcome to the Atlantic Council. When President Trump announced John's nomination last February, he laid out his ambitions for the Export-Import Bank under John's leadership. Quote, protect all of the gains from our strong tariff policies, guarantee our exports receive fair treatment, and always put American companies and our energy exports first, end quote. These are no small tasks. This mandate puts John and EXIM as crucial components of this administration's much discussed and much watched economic, trade, and energy policies. There is no person better qualified for this task than John Jovanovic. When John was confirmed by the Senate in September, he hit the ground running. EXIM has pushed forward on these priorities with new investments around the globe on energy exports and standing up new projects on critical minerals and their supply chain security, two topics that I'm sure we'll hear about today. These issues are fundamentally about how the United States engages with the world, which is also at the heart of the Atlantic Council's mission of shaping the world together alongside our partners and allies. By way of background, John's career has situated himself at the crossroads of geopolitics and finance. Before being confirmed as EXIM's president and chairman in September, he served as chief strategy officer at Asplundh, the largest provider of critical infrastructure services across North America, and prior to that, he was an investment director at Mercuria Energy Group. In government, John was the regional head and managing director for the Aegean and Western Balkans at the United States International Development Finance Corporation, America's $60 billion development bank, and he opened its first ever overseas office. At DFC, he was instrumental in countering Chinese and Russian malign influence by helping provide American-led financing in the region. He also led the implementation of President Trump's historic Washington agreements on economic normalization between Kosovo and Serbia. And oh yes, along the way, he also served as a non-resident senior fellow in the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. So John, it's a pleasure to have you back at the Atlantic Council, and we all look forward to the discussion. Now over to Landon Derrance, Vice President of Energy and Infrastructure, Senior Director and Morningstar Chair for Global Energy Security at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, who will moderate the discussion.
Chairman Jovanovic, welcome. John, welcome back, as I guess Fred would point out, to the Atlantic Council. Really excited to have you here for AC Front Page, which is our signature platform for bringing some of the most relevant, current, and important conversations to the Atlantic Council stage. So thank you for being here.
Lane, it's great to be here. It's great to see so many friends and former colleagues and partners in the audience. And a big thank you to Fred, of course, for not just inviting me, for continuing all the great work that Atlantic Council does. The power to convene that the Council has is tremendous. And so organizing very in-depth, robust conversations, hopefully like this one today. I know it will be.
We got a lot of work to do. We do. And I will say to our friends in the audience, you'll have an opportunity to be a part of this conversation as well. Go to askac.org and we can go ahead and tee up questions that you have for the chairman so that you're a part of the dialogue today as well. But I won't hold back and just get right into it. Honestly, John, looking at the calendar and going back to January 3rd, the president held back on keeping us busy this year. There's a lot of geopolitics going on in the world. You might have dodged a few trips to Venezuela, but if I look at Venezuela, if I look at the Mideast, I'm curious how you see EXIM's role in this world at a time of maybe some geopolitical volatility.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe best for those in the room, and I know many following us virtually, is to kind of reset everyone's understanding of what EXIM is and what we've set out to do with it. So by way of background, the bank was started 92 years ago by Franklin Roosevelt, and he had some very clear objectives in mind. He knew that he needed to open up some foreign markets and some demand for U.S. manufactured goods and services. as a way to really ensure that there were more jobs created, well-paying jobs here in America. And only a few short years later, a lot of that manufacturing and industrial capacity would, of course, be repurposed for the war effort. In fact, the gentleman who had my job became Commerce Secretary during World War II. It was such a very clear need to kind of muster and mobilize that capacity. And thereafter, the bank really hit its stride and had this golden era of really ushering in the 20th century as we know it, right? So helping deliver the Marshall Plan, helping ensure that some of the most critical infrastructure was built at home and abroad, and helping US companies spread all around the world. And so when I had the opportunity to throw my hat in the ring for something, and I was fortunate enough to sit across from the president at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, and I said, Mr. President, I'd love to be chairman of the Export-Import Bank. I think you deserve an economic tool that's a frontline tool once again. I said, Mr. President, you need something on the other end of a tariff. And that really caught his attention. And I said, I think there are 4 strategic priorities around which we can reorganize the bank. And what's been really incredible to see, Landon, is actually that clear vision being able to reawaken so much muscle memory in a building that for 92 years has done incredible things all around the world. So what are those 4 priorities? Maybe that's a good place to start. Number 1, let's bring the bank back to basics, right? As we said, the same challenges that President Roosevelt and the country faced then rhyme with our desperate need to reindustrialize America. And that's not just an objective for us in order to help create more jobs here. How are we a stronger, more reliable ally to our friends around the world? It's to strengthen our own sort of foundational base. That's number 1. Number 2 is energy dominance. It's not just a platitude, guys, and we're seeing that today. How do we help deliver American energy molecules and energy technologies to every corner of the globe? These are some of the most foundational decisions that countries or companies make. Let's help them build that connective tissue with the United States. Number 3, supply chain security. This one's pretty obvious. I know we'll spend a lot of time talking about this, hopefully. I know there's a lot of interest from our audience today. And number 4 is, how do we help companies in America win in the industries of the future? So we're very grateful to be a part of the President's Global AI Export Plan, outlined by my friend and actual classmate, Michael Kratsios, and led out of the White House, but an interagency team effort. But it's not just that, it's dual-use technology. So what does it mean to be a defense company in the year 2026? It's changed, right? And finally, we also have advanced mobility and other things. But that's really the foundational subset. And what I'm really very pleased and proud to say, and in very short order, we've been able to awaken that muscle memory and do significant things to move the needle.
I want to talk about some of the specifics in terms of where you're actually showing application on those. But before I do that, just looking at the mission, you brought up being a strong ally. And you think about the mission of the Atlantic Council, shaping the global future with our partners and allies. One of your signature moments this year was being in the Oval Office with the President and launching Project Vault. I don't want to deep dive Project Vault yet, but what I do want to highlight is that week we pulled 55 countries together to have a conversation around critical minerals in this city. You were a part of that dialogue, and so you're doing this exercise. You're thinking about EXIM's application alongside our partners and allies. And where do you see opportunities for collaborative engagement? Where do you see challenges in realizing a shared future together?
It's an excellent point, and a broader observation that I think is worth underlining here for our friends in the audience is that a lot of things that we're doing, Landon, to solve our own issues are going to accrue primary and secondary value to our strategic allies. So I'll give you 2 anecdotes, right? Anecdote number 1, a few weeks before the President announced Project Vault in the Oval Office, and by the way, it's the President's win. He made it happen. He really mustered and created a very clear mission that we had to address, but I know we'll talk about that later. Secretary Bessent invited me to address the G7 Plus Ministerial, focused on supply chain security. So these are the finance ministers from all our critical most allies all around the table, along with Ambassador Greer and others. And I gave them a preview of Project Vault, and their eyes lit up, right? And immediately they saw the opportunity to collaborate with the United States, because I tell people the same thing, and as you can imagine, we are inundated, unlike ever before, from countries, from governments, from companies from all around the world wanting to do business with the United States. And a lot of times we go back to critical supply chain issues. And I say the same thing. We've all become over-reliant on supply chains that aren't free, fair, functioning anymore. It's not your fault, it's ours. But let's solve it together. And if you help us solve it, it'll accrue value to you as well. And the second anecdote, as you mentioned, was, the president announced vault Monday afternoon in the Oval Office. 36 hours later, Secretary Rubio convened the largest gathering of foreign ministers, 55 plus from all around the world, to discuss these shared challenges, but where there's opportunity to collaborate. And I think it speaks to the holistic effort that's being taken, not just across our government, but interacting and working with our closest partners and allies, because together we have a tremendous amount of market power.
Okay, but two aspects of Project Vault, I am going to deep dive it now, that I find interesting that we haven't tackled yet. Number one is scale. We're talking about $10 billion of EXIM financing, the biggest in basically a century of the bank, going towards a critical national security imperative. And two, and I find this one really interesting too, it's really a $12 billion deal because you were able to bring the private sector along with you. So in addition to our partners and allies, I think you have implicitly, and the president has implicitly, a vision of making sure the private sector is engaged structurally in some of the deals you're doing. What's that look like? What makes Project Vault unique? And maybe you can actually give a little bit of background on how you see it being implemented as well.
Because I'm at the Atlantic Council, because it's such a special audience, I'm actually giving them a behind-the-scenes look at sort of how this came together, right? So how did it come together? We had a very clear directive from the president, which was help create the first strategic reserve for critical minerals the country's ever had, focused on non-defense manufacturers. We never had one, right? That's hard enough. But we said, okay, how are we going to do it in a way that doesn't invite more problems than it solves, right? So if you think about it, this is an enormous challenge. Today on the U.S. Geological Survey list, we have 60 deemed materials that are deemed critical minerals, 17 of which are rare earth elements, right? I mean, so these are pretty, this is not like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve where, like having grown up in commodities, sure, I'm going to tell you there are all different types of nuances, different, petroleum's petroleum, right? Where these minerals are very different. So we said, okay, what do we do? The first thing any logical person will do is they'll say, let's find a really good model to copy, right? There must be a really good idea out there that we could just sort of tweak a little bit and hit the ground running. The challenge was, Landon, is that none of these frameworks really fit what America did best. So we said, okay, wow, we've got to start with the first principles. What are we trying to solve? What's the problem? The fundamental problem is, in the past 25 to 30 years, manufacturers across the country and across the world have gone to a just-in-time inventory model, right? They're not bad people, right? But they've been incentivized to do so by their shareholders and stakeholders. Right. So we said, okay, well, we can force them to not do that, but that doesn't seem like a lasting solution, right? How do we create an alternative that they find as attractive or maybe slightly more attractive, depending on the company, to engage with what would become Project Vault and the Strategic Reserve? And so we said, all right, what are some things we want to avoid? We definitely want to avoid free riders, right? So we don't want to create an incentive where somebody just latches onto this and the US taxpayer subsidizes. That's a bad idea, right? So we said, okay, if the manufacturers are the ones for whom we're solving the problem, they've got to be on the hook and help us, right? Number two, we don't want to create massive market disruptions, right? That also sounds bad. How do we address that? Well, Landon, we're smart guys and we're smart people in this room. I bet if we shut the doors, we can come up with a plan for what we need to stockpile. But the challenge is we would be telling the market, and that's not a very American approach. We wanted to create a framework where the market told us what it needed, right? That it was demand oriented. And number three, we wanted to create a framework that was robust enough where it didn't just address one issue, it also was a gateway to all the other challenges that we have across the board, because simply by even doing something this big, it's still only solving a small part of our overall holistic supply chain problem. So how do we create a vehicle that can also incentivize other positive things to be happening in the market? And so that was sort of the story, and that's how Project Vault came together. But you're absolutely right. It pools together nearly $12 billion of capital. Sounds like a lot, but in reality, the way we have designed it is it's scalable, right? So, and it's demand driven, and so we think there's opportunity to take that higher if needed.
The Project Vault is dealing with one element of critical supply chains, and when I think about the competitiveness of this world, at different times you've had congressional signals to set up things like the China and Transformational Export Program. This is about helping American export competitiveness in a really challenging world. You've talked about energy. I think a lot of people think about aviation and different elements of the tech stack here in America. How about AI, biotech? Where else is EXIM getting engaged globally, and where should we be looking for you over the next 6 months or a year?
Look, we're in all of those critical areas that you've described. Again, it's been really special to see when you take a very clear approach and you try to do big, ambitious things, people take notice, right? And again, it's thanks to the president's leadership and his empowerment of people to do so. But I think an area that oftentimes gets overlooked, Landon, I think it's important for an audience like this to understand it, given your level of sophistication and how much you track all this. A lot of times we talk about supply chains, because a lot of these are domestic authorities, right, that we're talking about. And people just presume we're talking about the biggest companies in America and in the world, and it's actually the opposite, right? So 90% of what the bank does all day, every day, is actually work with small, medium-sized companies, because 95% of companies in America are small, medium-sized companies. They're a massive employer. And when we talk about supply chain, what does that mean, right? It means a group of companies coming together, each playing an important role in providing a puzzle piece to deliver a good or a service or an outcome, right? And so we don't ever want to lose track of that part of our mandate. And that is a foundational piece, along with all of the other big priorities, but ensuring that companies large and small. By the way, that's a feature of Vault as well. And it's not just for the biggest companies, but the biggest companies participating at scale creates the room and the opportunity for the mid and smaller guys to do.
For these companies that are maybe listening right now or will listen in the future as this is online, if you're a small and medium-sized company, how are you soliciting them to be a part of the conversation for projects that you see at scales of $10 billion? I mean, that's a massive undertaking, and how do they engage? How do you want them to engage with you?
The same way the largest company in the world would engage, right? Coming to Project Vault, demonstrating a very clear need, because the way it works, Landon, is it isn't us telling them what they need, it's them telling the project what they need. And so they're very clear with what commodity they need, at what grade, giving a price band at which they're willing to commit to buying and storing, having us do it on their behalf. And so the nice part about it is, given the way that the credit underwriting dynamics work, is that the participation of a very large, credit-worthy investment grade company creates a lot of room in the basket for smaller companies that may not be anywhere near having a credit rating, never even heard of that, but having the opportunity to have an open access point like Project Vault, given its public-private partnership dynamics, is mission critical.
And you talked about the just-in-time nature of delivery in terms of the supply chain. These small and medium-sized companies, even large companies, have a competitive world where sometimes, whether it's China, Vietnam, India, the component parts, the supply chain is existentially less expensive for them. So as a company, this is a business decision. How are you making sure that they engage with a little bit more long-term thinking about how EXIM can constructively help them map supply chains to be more American, to bring that industrial base back to the United States?
This has been actually one of the more special things I've ever gotten to experience in my career, is the president's call to action on addressing the need to reindustrialize America and to rethink some of the risk-reward inherent in these supply chain decisions is very, very real, right? Unlike any other point in my career, being able to bring to the table, some of the biggest rivals and competitors to sit next to one another, to work together, to put forth ideas on how we can bring about supply chain security, knowing that it'll benefit, sure, their rival, but it's a much better approach. And so we haven't had to go pound the table and convince CEOs that they need to rethink some of these decisions that they've made. They're coming to us fully understanding that it's bad for business in the long term, that what in the near term may yield some financial efficiency opens up considerable operational vulnerability in the mid to long term. And this is a golden opportunity to address some of that.
When you look at the reindustrialization of America and you see manufacturing coming back to our shores, I'm curious if you see it reinventing itself in new ways. Are there new business models that are coming, automation, the efficiencies that we'll see through AI? What does the future of business look like in America? How do we make sure our competitiveness is strengthened that way?
It's actually one of the coolest things to see up close and personal is actually how the productivity that AI can bring to all the work. Who in here has used AI in the last 72 hours? Raise your hand. I mean, it's almost everybody, right? Now think about having a dynamic manufacturing operation. Now think about you're behind your competitor and you're trying to eke out both efficiency and perhaps some innovation. What's the best way to innovate? It's to iterate, right? Now imagine you effectively have at your fingertips access to supercomputing power that can help you as a manufacturer, large and small, think about how to catch up on productivity. And that's just an incredible opportunity. I think there's a lot of pent-up economic growth that's sort of right there. And that's an excellent way to sort of, I think, give a shot in the arm to American productivity across the board. And it'll be really exciting to play out. Look, it's going to come with its ups and downs and its uncertainty for sure. But I think that's an area where we're just scratching the surface and how exciting it could be.
So obviously, when you have a mandate like myself here at the Atlantic Council, you have a bias on energy, and I know you have a bias too because you've actually nominated and put in place the first energy dominance officer at the bank, and I'm interested to.
He's now our chief strategy officer as well.
Oh, collecting titles. So
it's amazing. When we were in the Oval Office together, and we were about to leave. This was maybe two times ago, and Jeff Wilson, our good mutual friend and our colleague at EXIM, was there. And I said, Mr. President, do you want to meet the first ever energy dominance senior advisor at EXIM? And of course he said, yeah, of course I want to meet him. And so Jeff got a great photo out of it. But look, it's very much what we're doing is acknowledging the realities of the world in which we live, which is these are very foundational decisions that companies all around the world are making and are rethinking right at this moment, is how do I make the most secure energy procurement, energy supply decisions? What bet am I placing, right? So we see this not just, and look, we could talk about LNG, we could talk about on one end of the spectrum and crude oil and refined products, but we could also talk about some more long-dated strategic decisions like nuclear power, right? And we have this conversation all the time where people will come to us and they'll say, well, look, we're looking at a competitive solution that's not American-led on nuclear power. And they're giving us this and it's a little bit cheaper and what about that? And I look them square in the eye and say, it's a really big bet you're making, right? And so I'd ensure that you think about the holistic risk reward inherent in it and weigh all the pluses and minuses. And it's a pretty good bet to buy American and build the future, to partner with American technology to build your future. And that's something that isn't controversial, and it turns out it's very bipartisan.
Well, on projects like nuclear in particular as well, they have a legacy impact on that relationship that extends just past the commercial, right? You're talking about 80 to 100 years of diplomatic partnership and real commitment from the United States and from the partner government. But, I think you haven't been bashful about the energy story in terms of the competitiveness in manufacturing. You also haven't been bashful about being creative at EXIM and thinking about new applications. So we should deep dive.
Thank you for recognizing that. Can you tell my wife I'm creative?
I will tell your wife you're creative as well. But I mean, the LNG story to me is symbolic of that, right? I don't know that that's happened previously at the scale, certainly, of what you're doing there.
It hasn't, but we think it makes all the sense in the world, right? So we're very grateful to have a set of tools that over the past 92 years have been really battle tested, right? And what we've found is unique opportunities to deploy those tools to solve 21st century problems. And so, on the LNG story alone, guys, over the past couple of months, we've done a few $1 billion worth of support to American LNG exports going to places in the world they've never been, right? Displacing molecules that they otherwise would have procured from adversaries. And again, these are the ties that bind long-term to American industry, to American foreign policy, to strategic alliances. And so these are the opportunities that I think we have. Now, again, we balance that with some of our domestic mandate, but the bottom line, Landon, all this translates back to one magic word, jobs. And it's well-paying jobs in America that are supported or created by everything we do all day.
When I look at the model and what you're approaching on LNG in particular, it's integrated. And those of us that have seen you internationally at different stages, we were together in Athens and PTEC and thinking through how do we open up supply through the vertical corridor in Eastern Europe. You're doing that really holistically as a government. So you're working with the diplomatic corps, other agencies, the Department of Energy, and talk about that synergy that you're bringing. Why, there's a very holistic view on some of these projects, and I imagine that's helping you reach some of these markets that are the novel for U.S. LNG in particular.
Lynn, it's immensely helpful, right? And so whether it's interacting every day with the National Energy Dominance Council, thanks to Secretary Burgum and his leadership there, but also Secretary Wright, and working closely with DOE, whether it's the National Security Council, with whom somebody in our building interacts every single day. Same goes for the State Department, the intelligence community writ large. There's that really cohesive all-of-government approach, because these are problems that require a solution and fast. But if you double-click a layer below that, is also a lot of the independent economic agencies. And again, I was fortunate enough to serve the president in the first administration, as Fred very kindly outlined. And a lot of times we were sort of ships passing in the night, right? What's been fantastic to see is, we collaborate every single day with DFC. We collaborate every single day at every single level with the Office of Strategic Capital at the Department of War. Same goes for certain divisions and pockets of capital at Commerce, at the Department of Energy, at you name it, across the board. And because we're designed as puzzle pieces, and so for us to not want to come together and form a holistic picture and put ourselves forward, I joke, and again, these aren't just because at the very senior level we enjoy friendships amongst ourselves. We built the connective tissue across our organizations. And I joked to my counterparts at OSC and DFC and all these other places, I'm your best salesman, right? Every time somebody comes to us and says, I need this, I say, have I got somebody for you to call, right? Because just because it doesn't fit us doesn't mean we want to see it die on the vine. We want to see it come forward.
I will say it's a much more advantageous position to get off the plane, walk down a red carpet, and be the guy with the money as opposed to the sanctions. So I think that's probably a prudent decision on taking this role. It is an important job, but there's different applications.
I see some prolific former sanctions czars in the audience. It's a really important job.
It stood out to me as well. Reminding the audience, you can ask some questions here. It's askac.org, and we'd love to get you into the mix.
Fred can't ask any follow-up questions.
Fred is not going to ask any more follow-up questions, but I did have a question from Maya, and I see one online too that's keying in
Maya
a little bit. It is Maya Piskic.
One of my favorite people. Perfect.
So she's talking about the Western Balkans. So thinking back to your work on Kosovo and Serbia, the complexities of energy transition and security in the region. How does EXIM assess opportunities in the region, particularly renewable energy she's asking for, but grid modernization, LNG? That's a very specific market. And how are you looking at markets like that at that scale?
It's a good question. It's a typical Maya question. It's very good, but it's layered, so I'm going to unpack it for a moment. I think first and foremost, it's worth noting that the region has a tremendous opportunity to engage with this administration. And I've not been shy about saying that to some of the leaders who have reached out wanting to speak about it, but also publicly. And so this isn't an opportunity to miss. Some have heeded that call and done quite well. Others are, I think, seeing that there's a sizable opportunity, and they're also trying to seize it, which we very much welcome. Problems aren't wine. They don't get better with time. And a lot of the issues that the region's grappling with, they were grappling with when I was sitting in a different chair at the end of the first Trump administration. And energy security is one of them. That's where some of the efforts that you've described are mission critical to helping them bring about the type of security that they need and they deserve long term. I think there is probably an underdeveloped opportunity to work together on supply chain security. That's where some EXIM tools can really come into play. But fundamentally, all of the core, President's very clear on what are the best ways to engage and how can we really fortify our strategic alliances and our strategic relationships. And they all start with a lot of these economic issues that we're describing today and talking through. And so I think that door is wide open, and I very much hope that the entire region seizes this opportunity to engage.
I want to keep it on a regional lens, and I prematurely featured this question from David Willick, which is, will the U.S. EXIM Bank help finance critical mineral projects in Canada, which would supply needs products to both the U.S. and Canada? So I think you can definitely answer this from the perspective of Canada specifically, but more importantly, what is the lengths in terms of how you're approaching projects that benefit your 4 core principles in terms of investment internationally as well?
So look, there's a great example and a great template for this, right? So one of the first things that I was able to do at scale after being nominated and coming to our seat was helping the president deliver on his supply chain security framework with the government of Australia. And they're particularly forward-leaning and forward-thinking, but the bottom line was we knew that we had puzzle pieces that could really come together. And there were $2.2 billion worth of transactions that we supported, which equated to $5 billion worth of projects. We believe that's not even the end of the beginning of that opportunity set. But what it really comes down to is, and I meant what I said a moment ago, where our strategic allies can help us address some of these foundational problems for ourselves, we want to do it in a way that's mutually beneficial. And so we have the Supply Chain Resiliency Initiative at EXIM, which allows us to actually deploy capital abroad in countries where some of the feedstock or the production will come to the United States. What a great example, right, of where we can help spark and catalyze capital formation in projects with our strategic allies where there's a very clear tie to American industry and to our domestic needs. And so that's an initiative that we're very eager to put to work. And it was actually something that the previous administration had put in place, which we're very grateful. And so we're actually, I think as of my briefing this morning, we're close to the first ever supply chain resiliency deal that the bank's ever done, and we hope to do more.
We've talked about some of these topics and keying in on the critical minerals theme of that question. We've talked about some of these topics from an aspect of broad thematics and supply chains. My team would tell me, hey, think about relative criticality. If everything's critical, nothing's critical. How are you distilling down what are the most important elements of these projects? I think the supply chain critical minerals component in particular, I've spent some time with David Copley, obviously running the NFC.
Fantastic.
A great guy with great vision, but also recognizing this is an international story. So how are you narrowing down the field and thinking about what minerals, what you should be working on? Because it's such a big picture and a big problem. So we got to bring some specificity to it.
So look, first and foremost, I think it starts with how we run EXIM and how we manage the building, right? We're human. We have finite hours in the day, finite people in the building, finite bandwidth, finite capital. And so it's really important to actually put forth a set of strategic objectives. Our 4 are guiding principles, right? So we don't discriminate against any company, we assess every opportunity, but there is a need to prioritize. And so simply offering that clarity, Landon, is key, because everybody shows up to work every day by and large and wants to win. You just gotta show them what the path to winning looks like. So that's number 1. And then number 2, the real key that I've learned now in my second stint in government is to keep your main objective the main thing and to really allow for the team to come together. And that will help address some of these needs. So you mentioned David Copley, an incredible patriot, a deep subject matter expert on supply chains, someone with whom we work almost daily. I speak to him almost daily, right? It's great to have not just the White House mobilized across all these various groups, but the interagency come together because they set the priority and we ensure that our tools are available to make a big impact in short order.
All right, to the audience, let's put the chairman to work. We want to do some audience questions.
This is a nice warm-up.
And we have times, we have mic runners, so if you want to raise your hand, we'll identify you and you can get engaged here as well. Any takers? All right, in the back right here.
Thank you. Jay Kansara, Sinsei. It's a company that's dealing in critical minerals as well as some agricultural commodities. How do you address the asymmetry between a country like China that subsidizes practically all of their major industrial output and export companies, or at least the markets in which they operate, and the market-based approach that EXIM Bank seeks to apply to its mandate?
I'd say there are two things worth noting here. Number one is that our focus on supply chain security is to de-risk our own supply chains, right? As I said a moment ago, it has almost nothing to do with anybody else, everything to do with us, and as a result, our strategic allies. But to take it a step further, you talk about market dynamics, right? And we become over-reliant on markets that don't function. They're not free, they're not fair. And we're oftentimes, as you know, being in the business, we're on the consuming end, talking to a lot of the producers, right, all around the world. What's been really interesting to hear from them is we want our markets to function again. We understand that being over-dependent or over-reliant on certain actors isn't good for business in the long term. Help us create a market dynamic that, sure, may involve sort of some transition, may involve some challenges in the near term, but we'd much rather see a healthy market thrive for whatever it is that we extract or refine or produce. And that's been that breath of fresh air, saying, okay, let's bring these markets back to health. And look, if you ask me, the best way for us to achieve our objectives is to be the best versions of ourselves, right? To put America's best foot forward, not to try to copy somebody else's strengths or somebody else's system, is to say what makes America uniquely capable, and how do we design frameworks and initiatives that put our best foot forward?
Great question, and it makes me think about the fact that, when you, in the context of critical minerals in China, 85% of processing, 90% of processing for rare earths, you begin to create new market opportunities when you suffocate the market in that kind of monopoly, right? Comparatively, LNG, Qatar is 20% or we're 30% of the global market. No one has direct culpability. Are you seeing new market opportunities present themselves in the supply chains because of China's emboldenedness and control over the processing side of critical minerals?
What we're saying is the president's message resonate loud and clear with our strategic allies all around the world, is that he wants to usher in, an era where security, stability, and prosperity thrive all together, right? And so where we can work with our strategic allies to together work on mutually beneficial frameworks that actually help bring about security, stability, and prosperity for them domestically in ways that perhaps their other partners wouldn't allow for or don't have, the capability to do, or quite frankly, the willingness to see a lot of these new entrants into these markets thrive, makes total sense to us.
Other questions from the audience? We'll go right here.
Great job. We're working, Dan Bice, Pingia Global. We're working with your team in Uzbekistan, head-to-head with the Chinese. I want to shift my question to another delightful country to deal with, Bulgaria. Nuclear, the vertical gas corridor. I think EXIM is getting more involved there. I was curious, what do you think of Bulgaria and that whole region?
I think tremendous opportunity set writ large for Southeast Europe. As I think is always sort of those who observe and work in that part of the world deeply understand, is that them coming together, unifying a lot of their economic activity, working together to bring about the energy and supply chain security, they're much better off doing it together than they are one-off. And so, we see a lot of opportunity both in Bulgaria, but also we see countries like that, and I wish Jeff was here and others who work on this day in and day out, because obviously I have a little broader portfolio to manage these days, but there's also opportunity for them to be a positive catalyst for their neighbors and to address some of these regional issues. So we're very optimistic, and quite frankly, I think it's refreshing to see the Southeast European heads of state, finance ministers, energy ministers come to see us with still a very deep desire to push forward market-based solutions, to continue to engage with the United States. And you mentioned your work with Uzbekistan. One of the cool things is that we've started this year at EXIM is our Buy American, Build the Future framework. And so many people will come to the United States these days and make these broad, sweeping commitments. They'll say, gosh, over the next 50 years, we want to buy $1 gazillion worth of US goods and commodities, or we want to partner with these 12 technology companies. And our team and I say, great, what do you want to do in the next 3 years? And how can we put together a plan to help make sure that you have every opportunity to partner with the best that America has to offer? And how does that help fulfill some of the objectives you have? So for instance, with our friends from Uzbekistan, it's a great example. It wasn't that they provided us with a shopping list. In fact, they provided us with a set of challenges that they had that they wanted help with to effectuate the type of economic growth and stability that would lead to the prosperity that they wanted for their people. And they wanted to partner with the United States on it. So a big need there is, as you probably know, water irrigation, right? And so they weren't even thinking about American companies. And we gave them a few, and sure enough, the last time I was with the president, we had at the table an American company that was, for the first time ever, having the opportunity to put forth its plan. And so those are the type of opportunities that we want to seize, and those are some great regions to do it in.
Pragmatic problems with pragmatic solutions as well. Yeah. Ambassador Fried, I saw you raise your hand.
Mr. Jovanovic, that was a terrific presentation. And if I had to put a label on what you were describing, I would almost call that a free world, an EXIM strategy of underwriting the free world. And that was solid, honestly solid stuff. So here's my question, since Landon said we should make you work. What you were describing involves mid to longer term investments. And yet the short-term instability in trade can throw that off. You know, yesterday the president threatened a trade embargo against Spain, based on, on Spanish problems with Spain's policy toward the Iran conflict. How do you think you can sustain the strategy you laid out against the risk of short-term and continuing instability? Because I do wish you well, and I think a lot of people do.
Well, first off, I deeply appreciate it, and coming from someone of your caliber, someone of your deep experience, it's an enormous compliment, so thank you. But let's get to the tough part of your question, right? Fundamentally, and here's where, honestly, Ambassador Fried, having grown up in the energy and commodities markets my entire career, what you call uncertainty and instability, I call volatility. And these are factors that are something that every CEO, every head of government, every key stakeholder has to plan and work through. We're going through a period of enormous change across the globe. And the reality of the matter is that even within that framework, everyone has to make mid to long-term plans, right? Now, will it be a straight line? Will it zig? Will it zag? Of course, man plans, God laughs, as you know. But fundamentally, I think the challenges that we're all facing, first and foremost, that we're facing in the United States, right? Because, my number one stakeholder, the person to whom I have a deep, both fiduciary obligation as someone who puts their capital and puts their hard-earned tax dollars to use, but also, we are a national economic security organization through and through, right? If you read Walter Isaacson's book, The Wise Men, right, he talks a lot about how all these frameworks were built. And so we don't forget who we're serving, but as an extension of that, as you well noted, we have our strategic allies as well. And so the bottom line is that we share these deep set of challenges, but we also see, at least for me, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to help solve them together. And so there's going to be near-term volatility across the board, but we can't lose sight of the need to make this long-term plan, and we're, God willing, going to continue to be successful. Thanks not just to some ingenuity we have in the building and some hard work and the support from the president, but also our great strategic allies around the world who are heeding the call to action, coming to the table, and wanting to work with us.
So John, you've been generous with your time, and I would love to keep the audience questions going, but I think we have to close this out soon. I couldn't do that without having one final conversation, which when we were in Florence together at an event, you made a very impassioned plea and conversation about the reasons why EXIM needs to be reauthorized by Congress this year. And so let's just get to it. What is that going to take? What is your ambition? Because I've seen some pretty ambitious responses to the work like Project Vault that say this needs to be even bigger. But what do you need from the stakeholders around Washington to make sure that happens?
Yeah, look, I mean, the EXIM that people see today is a very different bank than the one that they've encountered over the past few decades. But also, candidly, you know, these times call for a very strong, robust export-import bank, along with many other sister agencies that we work together with. So here's the punchline, right? We are taking an approach to authorization that is, we want to ensure a very clean, timely, quick authorization that does not put any of this great work that our team is doing at risk. So at this point, we have $71+ billion worth of activity in the pipeline. We are named explicitly in a dozen+ executive orders, and we are working with nearly every pocket of the federal government to try to effectuate national economic security solutions. We're on the Hill almost every day, talking to Democrats and Republicans alike about the importance of this. And look, more Democrats voted for me than against me coming out of committee. It's not because they like John, it's because they see that the bank has a real need across the board. And these aren't controversial issues, Landon, that we've talked through today. They're common sense things. And so we'd very much encourage everybody in here is a leader. Everybody in here has a voice. And so don't be shy about saying that seeing an EXIM reauthorized and reauthorized in a timely, clean manner is great. And by the way, one thing that's really cool is when we're walking like we were today through the halls of the Capitol and having members come up to us and say, hey, I'm working on a piece of legislation or I'm sponsoring a bill, and we see an opportunity to include a modernization for EXIM or a new tool for EXIM. All of a sudden, look, it's kind of hard to be a prophet in your own land, Landon, but when others want to see you do well and they want to add to it, that's even better.
Well, I think Congress knows and this city knows that something you pointed out, that the world is really at a moment and period of self-reflection on what free and fair markets look like and what our role as the United States is in those. We at the Atlantic Council certainly want to be a part of that conversation with you and your team going forward, and really incredibly appreciate your time joining us today. So if I could ask the audience to thank the chairman of the Export and
Thank you, guys.
John, it's great to have you here. Thank you, everybody.